Alright, so the question is the time to awakening. Um, I've struggled with this question because, the way to answer it and all this stuff. But I'm going to give you the base answer and then I'm going to add something that you could add if you want, but I don't think is that relevant. So you talk about the normal awakening time of CP50, the number, and then you talk about the context-sensitive decrement time, what a longer infusion is, what a shorter infusion is. And then you talk about the distribution, so volume of distribution. So in my head, it's better to split it through patient factors, okay? But ADME is probably best so you don't forget clearance. So A for the infusion duration, D for the distribution, the patient factors, cardiac output, basically, E for clearance, and then the pharmacodynamic factors. So that would be the best way to not miss anything. CP50 for awakening is 1.5, which is the CP required to achieve the specific effect in 50% of the patient. That's CP50. CE lags behind CP50. It's usually 1 to 1.2. Context-sensitive decrement time is the time required for the percentage X of the CP to fall in the context of the duration of the infusion when ceased. The duration of the infusion. No, context-sensitive half time is when CP falls by 50. Now, therefore, the duration of the infusion, increased duration of infusion, greater saturation of the infusion, increases context-sensitive decrement time. Short infusion approaches the T half due to the distribution from V1 to V2 and V3 less significantly. Therefore, a shorter context-sensitive half time, faster wake up. Due to the propofol not having enough time to distribute to the slow and rapid equilibrating compartments. Now, a longer fusion approaches T half beta, a terminal elimination half-life, where redistribution from V2 and V3 back into V1 and the clearance. You have low distribution and elimination is reliant on the clearance. So the reason why it's slower in longer one is because you have longer time for the peripheral compartments have a greater concentration of the drug, increased context-sensitive decrement time, increased longer wake-up time. And then context-sensitive time 10 minutes is 5, and 3 hours is 10 minutes. Now, then we talk about distribution, volume of distribution. This is where it gets a bit mucky. I will stick to patient factors. Increased cardiac output means increased distribution, and I'm not really going to get into the argument about short and long. Decreased cardiac output, decreased distribution, and you can also talk about old people have an increased fat and a decreased total body water, and so they have a small central compartment, so they get more drug in the central compartment, and so it's slower wake up time. We can talk about elderly in PD, so that's something. Then Raffler talks about KO. I don't know how relevant KO is here, but you can mention it because an increased KO does reduce the T half-life, so it does make sense. KO is based on the physicochemical properties of the drug, and so it's proportional to the Fick's law, but not the concentration gradient. Because that explains why a bolus dose doesn't affect the KO, or the KO is not affected by the bolus dose, right? The bolus dose affects the time to peak effect. But the actual dose. So basically, the time to peak. So why concentration gradient is not because the time to peak effect, which is dependent on KO and not dependent on the bolus dose. So that just shows you that the concentration gradient is not important because the time to peak effect is based on the KO and not the bolus dose. The time to awakening is based on the KO, or the time to sleep is based on the bolus dose or the dose, but the time to peak effect is not dependent on the bolus, right? Because it's a constant, and it is dependent on the KO. So that's just something to consider. Anyway, then you talk about clearance, which is important. So hepatic clearance is 30 mils per kilo per minute, and it's far greater than hepatic blood flow. So only severe hepatic failure actually affects it. And then you talk about pharmacodynamic factors. So simply Drug sensitivity. Elderly have more drug sensitivity. Drug interactions synergistic with opioids. And then I always forget this one for some reason. Receptor numbers, which is the regulation number and regulation example tolerance. Now, elderly people have a reduced total body weight, reduced cardiac output, reduced hepatic function, plus PD difference, which is why they wash out slower. So that's just that's the best way of not complicating it.